Good morning, and here is this week's food for thought. As we continue looking at the 10 ways to love, we come to the second in my points of love. You see, I base it off of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse number 7. Now, 1 Corinthians 13 is a common passage that's used at weddings. And what should be the word that describes weddings? Well, that word should be love. And 99.9% of the time, that is what is read as the scripture passage by the pastor or the priest who is performing and officiating the ceremony. Now, we see this, we begin to see in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse number 7, Paul says this to the church: love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So the second of the 10 ways to love is to trust without wavering. To trust without wavering. Now that word trust is to put a firm belief in the reliability, in the truth, in the ability, or in the strength of someone or something else. Have you ever played the trust game? I will never forget one time, decades ago, when I was asked to be a speaker at a community event called Poultry Days. We lived in Ohio, and I was serving in a church, and I was asked, as we closed the churches in the community, and we held a church under a tent with hay and in the back of a trailer, we preached a sermon, and I was called to preach the sermon. And in the midst of this, I was talking about trust, and the trust that we have, and the trust that we should have for one another, and the trust that we have for God. And so I called my oldest daughter up. At this time, I would say she's maybe about 7 or 8 years old. And I wanted to use the example of trust. And in the trust game, what you're doing is you are telling the other person to close their eyes, or you're going to cover their eyes, to cross their hands, and to fall backwards in trust of knowing that the other person is going to be there to catch them. And so I called my daughter up, and I told her we're going to do this trust game as an example. And as I explained the directions to everyone else gathered under the tent, my daughter dove backwards because she trusted that her father was going to be there to catch her. I wasn't rightfully prepared, but I quickly got adjusted in order to catch her from falling and smacking the back of her head off of the trailer. It was a scary moment for me. But truthfully, when I talked to my daughter, she told me it wasn't a scary moment for her, because she knew and continues to know that I love her. She knows that I'm not going to intentionally try and hurt her in any way. And with that, her trust, because of the love that she had for her daddy and the love that her daddy has for her, she wasn't wavering in that fact. Now, what does it mean to waver? Waver means to become weaker, to falter in our beliefs or in our stance. Now, that doesn't mean that people that we love are going to be perfect. And it doesn't mean that people are not going to at times let us down. But our trust remains that they're not there to hurt us, that they're not there to cause us pain or horrible feelings or maybe even punishment. So today I want to encourage you to love your neighbor as yourself, to trust without wavering, to know that that person loves you and that you are called to love them as well. For love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Today, love one another, trust one another, and be willing to be there for one another. Until next time, God bless.